Charlie Chaplin sits hunched over his mahogany writing desk at 3:47 a.m., surrounded by towers of crumpled manuscript pages that represent 6 months of failed attempts to perfect the script for what will become City Lights. His fountain pen hovers uncertainly above the latest draft while his exhausted mind struggles to solve a narrative problem that has defeated every previous approach. Suddenly, with a flash of insight that feels almost supernatural, his creative consciousness speaks with crystal clarity. "Charlie, none of this is working. You need to start completely over. Throw away everything you've written and begin from the very beginning." What unfolds during the next 11 hours and 34 minutes of total creative reconstruction doesn't just represent one artist's pursuit of perfection. It demonstrates how genuine artistic breakthrough often requires the courage to abandon months of work when intuition demands radical change, and reveals that true creative genius lies not in avoiding failure but in recognizing when existing approaches must be completely discarded to achieve authentic artistic vision. Charlie Chaplin Studios, Writing Room 2, September 18, 1929, early Wednesday morning, 3:47 a.m. The private workspace that Charlie designed specifically for script development has become a monument to creative struggle. Manuscript pages cover every available surface, scattered across the Persian rug, stacked on bookshelves, overflowing from waste baskets, and taped to walls where Charlie has attempted to visualize story structure. The room tells the story of an artist wrestling with material that refuses to cooperate despite exhaustive effort. Charlie, at 40, has been developing this particular project for 8 months, longer than he has ever spent on script preparation. The story centers on the relationship between the little tramp and a blind flower girl, exploring themes of love, sacrifice, and the gap between reality and perception. But despite hundreds of hours of writing, rewriting, and restructuring, the screenplay remains fundamentally flawed in ways that Charlie can sense but cannot identify or correct. The creative process began with tremendous optimism. Charlie envisioned this film as his masterpiece, a perfect synthesis of comedy and drama that would demonstrate silent cinema's continuing artistic relevance despite the industry's rush toward talking pictures. He wanted to create something so emotionally powerful and technically sophisticated that audiences would recognize silent film as irreplaceable art form rather than obsolete technology. But 8 months of development have produced only frustration and creative confusion. Every approach Charlie has attempted, romantic comedy, social satire, pure drama, feels inadequate to the story's emotional requirements. Characters that seem compelling in outline become flat and predictable when developed in scene-by-scene detail. Plot devices that appear clever in conception feel contrived when executed dramatically. The wastebaskets around Charlie's desk contain evidence of his creative struggle. 17 different opening sequences, 23 alternate endings, 46 variations on the crucial scene where the tramp first encounters the flower girl. Each discarded version represents hours or days of intensive work, yet none achieves the emotional authenticity Charlie knows the story requires. "What is wrong with this material?" Charlie mutters to himself, reviewing his latest attempt at the screenplay's second act. "I can feel what the story should be, but I can't seem to write what I feel." This frustration reflects one of the fundamental challenges of creative work, the gap between artistic vision and technical execution. Charlie possesses a clear emotional understanding of what the film should accomplish, but translating that understanding into effective dramatic structure has proven unexpectedly difficult. The specific problem that has been defeating Charlie's efforts concerns the relationship between comedy and pathos. He wants the film to be funny enough to satisfy audiences expecting little tramp humor, but also emotionally moving enough to justify its serious romantic themes. Balancing these requirements has proven more complex than Charlie anticipated. His early drafts emphasized comedy but felt emotionally shallow. His later attempts developed the romantic relationship more fully but lost the comedic energy that defines the tramp character. Recent versions have attempted to alternate between comic and dramatic scenes, but these efforts feel schizophrenic rather than integrated. The problem, Charlie realizes as he studies his latest pages, is that I'm treating comedy and drama as separate elements that need to be combined, rather than recognizing them as different aspects of the same human experience. This insight represents a crucial breakthrough in Charlie's understanding of his material, but it also reveals why all his previous approaches have failed. He has been trying to construct a story that alternates between funny and serious moments instead of creating situations that are simultaneously funny and serious. Charlie's creative revelation emerges from sheer exhaustion. After working continuously for 18 hours, his analytical mind finally stops interfering with his intuitive understanding of the story. In a moment of clarity that feels almost mystical, he suddenly comprehends what the screenplay requires. The tramp doesn't fall in love despite his comedic nature, Charlie whispers to himself with growing excitement. He falls in love because of his comedic nature. His humor, his grace under pressure, his ability to maintain dignity in ridiculous situations. These aren't obstacles to romance, they're exactly what makes him worthy of love. This realization transforms Charlie's understanding of every character and situation in the screenplay. Instead of viewing the tramp's comic behavior as separate from his romantic feelings, Charlie begins to see how his character's fundamental decency expresses itself through both humor and love. But recognizing the correct approach to the material means acknowledging that everything he has written over the past 8 months has been based on a fundamental misconception about the story's emotional structure. 6 months of intensive work, hundreds of pages of dialogue, detailed scene descriptions, character development, and plot construction must be discarded entirely. This is either creative breakthrough or complete mental breakdown, Charlie tells himself as he stares at the manuscript pages representing so many months of effort. But I know what I have to do. Charlie makes the decision that separates genuine artists from competent craftspeople. He chooses to abandon all existing work and begin completely fresh, guided by his new understanding of the story's requirements. Beginning at 4:23 a.m., Charlie systematically discards every page of existing screenplay material. He doesn't save promising scenes or clever dialogue passages for potential later use. He doesn't attempt to salvage character development that might fit the new approach. He eliminates everything, creating a completely blank creative slate. If I keep any material from the old approach, Charlie explains to himself while feeding pages into the wastebasket, I'll be tempted to force new ideas into old structures instead of allowing the new approach to develop organically. This process proves more emotionally difficult than Charlie anticipated. Some of the discarded scenes represent weeks of intensive development and contain moments of writing that he considers among his best work. Throwing away months of effort feels like destroying part of himself. But Charlie understands that attachment to previous work often prevents artists from achieving necessary breakthroughs. Creative evolution requires willingness to sacrifice good work in pursuit of great work, to abandon competent solutions when excellent solutions become possible. With the slate cleaned completely, Charlie begins developing the new script based on his insight about comedy and romance as integrated rather than alternating elements. Instead of writing scenes that are either funny or touching, he writes situations that derive their emotional power from the combination of humor and pathos. The opening sequence, written between 5:30 and 7:45 a.m., immediately demonstrates the effectiveness of this new approach. The tramp's first encounter with the flower girl becomes simultaneously funny and heartbreaking because his comedic attempts to appear wealthy spring from genuine desire to protect her feelings rather than selfish vanity. This is what the story needed, Charlie realizes as he reviews the morning's pages. The humor doesn't detract from the emotion, it intensifies it by showing how good people try to maintain hope and dignity even in difficult circumstances. As the morning progresses and Charlie continues developing the new script, he discovers that his revised approach solves multiple problems that had been frustrating his previous efforts. Character motivation becomes clearer because the tramp's actions spring from consistent emotional impulses rather than alternating between comic and dramatic requirements. Plot structure becomes more organic because situations develop naturally from character relationships rather than being imposed by external dramatic formulas. Most importantly, the integration of comedy and pathos creates opportunities for the kind of emotional complexity that justifies Charlie's ambitions for the project. Audiences will laugh at the tramp's romantic efforts while simultaneously being moved by the sincerity and generosity that motivate those efforts. By noon, Charlie has written more effective material in 8 hours than he had produced in the previous 8 months. The new approach flows naturally from his understanding of the characters and situations, requiring much less forcing and manipulation than his earlier attempts. But the real test comes when Charlie begins developing the screenplay's most challenging sequence, the scene where the flower girl's sight is restored and she discovers the true identity of her mysterious benefactor. Charlie's previous versions of this scene had failed because they treated the revelation as either purely comic or purely dramatic. Comic approaches made the girl's recognition seem trivial. Dramatic approaches made the tramp's earlier deceptions seem cruel rather than kindly protective. The new approach allows Charlie to write the scene as simultaneously funny and deeply moving. The girl's recognition of the tramp becomes touching precisely because she sees past his ridiculous appearance to appreciate the genuine goodness that motivated his deception. She's not seeing through his comic exterior to find a serious person underneath, Charlie realizes as he develops the scene. She's recognizing that his comic exterior expresses the serious person he really is. This understanding allows Charlie to write a conclusion that satisfies both the story's emotional requirements and its comedic tradition. The tramp's dignity in the final scene emerges from the same qualities that made him funny throughout the film. By 3:30 p.m., 12 hours after beginning the complete rewrite, Charlie has created a screenplay that achieves everything he had been trying to accomplish for 8 months. The new script integrates comedy and drama so seamlessly that audiences will experience both simultaneously rather than switching between different emotional modes. But Charlie's creative marathon isn't finished. Recognizing that his breakthrough understanding of the material might not be sustainable once exhaustion and routine daily concerns intrude, he continues writing until he has completed a full detailed treatment of the entire story. The writing session finally concludes at 3:21 a.m. Thursday morning, nearly 24 hours after it began. Charlie has produced a complete screenplay that represents his most sophisticated work to date and achieves the perfect balance of humor and emotion that had eluded all his previous efforts. 3 weeks later, when Charlie begins filming City Lights, using this new script, the production proceeds more smoothly than any of his previous projects. The integrated approach to comedy and drama that emerged from his marathon rewriting session guides every aspect of the film's development. When City Lights premieres 18 months later, critics immediately recognize it as Charlie's masterpiece, praising specifically the seamless integration of humor and emotion that had been the goal of his exhausting creative struggle. But the significance of that September night extends beyond the creation of a single successful film. Charlie's willingness to abandon 8 months of work when his intuition demanded radical change establishes a creative methodology that will guide his approach to all future projects. That night taught me the difference between persistence and stubbornness, Charlie explains in a 1952 interview. Persistence means continuing to pursue your goals even when the work is difficult. Stubbornness means continuing to use ineffective methods even when you know they're not working. What was the most important insight from that experience? That creative breakthrough often requires creative destruction. You cannot discover better solutions while clinging to inferior approaches that feel safe because they represent substantial investment of effort. Sometimes the greatest act of creativity is recognizing when to start over completely. How do you know when existing work should be abandoned versus when it should be developed further? You have to distinguish between technical problems and fundamental problems. Technical problems can be solved through continued refinement of existing approaches. Fundamental problems require discarding existing approaches in favor of completely different methods. Years later, when film students study Charlie's creative process, they identify several principles that apply beyond filmmaking. That artistic vision must take precedence over investment protection. That breakthrough innovations often require abandoning previous achievements, that creative courage involves willingness to sacrifice good work for the possibility of great work, and that authentic artistic development requires periodic complete reconstruction rather than mere incremental improvement. The 11 hours and 34 minutes Charlie spent reconstructing his script for City Lights proved that genuine creative progress sometimes demands the courage to destroy months of effort when intuition reveals superior approaches, and that the most important creative skill is recognizing when persistence becomes counterproductive attachment to inadequate solutions. The wastebaskets filled with discarded manuscript pages from that night are preserved in the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences archives, representing one of cinema's most important lessons about the creative process, that great art often emerges not from perfecting initial approaches, but from having the courage to start completely over when better understanding reveals better possibilities.